welcome to What's Happening Now on KBLKRadio.com. And thank you for tuning in. This is your host, Bishop Bowser, and we have an exciting show for you today, and everyone should be listening. And as always, we want you to call or text, tweet, whatever you do in communication, and text or call 7 people and tell them to tune in to this show right now. Just tell them to go to KBLKRadio.com on their radio, on their computer, laptop, whatever they have. If they have access to the internet, get up, get on right now. So ladies and gentlemen, this morning we have a good one for you because we have Kenneth Douglas and Ben Kelsel. Ben Kelsel is the president of the Black Police Officer Association. And our topic for this morning is the matter of race in community policing. If you want to call and join this conversation, you can call in at 619-919-4745. Again, if you want to call in and join the conversation, you can call in at 619-919-4745. Now, before I begin with bring our guests into the conversation here today, I just have a few things I want to say about what has happened recently in the shootings, and also give some little comments on racism and also dealing with community policing. And so, our nation once again is in an uproar concerning 2 black men that were killed by law enforcement this past week. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, Terrence Crutcher was killed. And in Charlotte, North Carolina, Keith Scott was killed by police officers. Even though one of the officers involved in the recent killings of these black men, one was a black officer. But that doesn't matter to the black community because what we're really dealing with is institutional and structural racism. Now, when we talk about structural racism, we're talking about a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural representation, and other norms work in various and often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequity. It identifies dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed privileges associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time. Structural racism is not something that a few people or institutions choose to practice. Instead, it has been a feature of the social, economic, and political systems in which we all exist. So when we look at structural racism and institutional racism refers to the policies and practices within and across institutions that intentionally or not produce outcomes that chronically favor or put a racial group at a disadvantage. Pointing examples of institutional racism can be found in school disciplinary policies in which students of color are punished at much higher rates than their white counterparts. Also, in the criminal justice system and within many employment sectors in which day-to-day operations as well as hiring and firing practices can significantly disadvantage workers of color. And let's look at also stop and frisk and pretext stops are examples of institutional racism. So the police stop blacks and whites at rates that are much higher than whites. I should say black and Latinos at rates that are much higher than whites. There was a study done in New York City where people of color make up about half of the population, yet 80% of the New York stops were blacks and Latinos. And out of that 80%, 90% of the people that were stopped were not committing a crime, were not arrested for anything. When whites were stopped, only 8% were frisked. When blacks and Latinos are stopped, 85% were frisked, according to information provided by the New York Police Department. The same is true most other places as well, and also in California. There was a study by ACLU that found that blacks are 3 times more likely to be stopped than whites. A 2015 study by University of California, Davis researcher concluded there was no relationship between crime rates by race and racial bias in police killings. A report released by the Center for Police Equity, which reviewed arrests and use of force data from 12 police departments, concluded that black residents were more often targeted for use of police force than white residents. even when adjusting for whether the person was a violent criminal. So according to the most recent census data, there are nearly 160 million more white people in America than there are black people. White people make up roughly 62% of the U.S. population, but only 49% of those who are killed by police officers. African Americans, however, account for 24% of those fatally shot and killed by the police, despite being just 13% of the U.S. population. As the Washington Post noted in an analysis, black Americans are 2.5 times as likely as white Americans to be shot and killed by police officers. So let's say, for example, U.S. police officers have shot, they shoot maybe and kill the exact same number of unarmed white people as they have unarmed black people. Let's say 50 each. But because the white population is approximately 5 times larger than the black population, which would mean unarmed black Americans were 5 times as likely as unarmed white Americans to be shot and killed by a police officer. About 13% of all black people who have been fatally shot by police since January 2015 were unarmed, compared with 7% of all white people. Now, all we want is fair and equal treatment, but how can we begin to move towards a more humane and righteous society when we can't have an honest and truthful discussion about a historical injustice that has brutalized, traumatized, discriminated against people of color, and specific black people since slavery, continuing with Jim Crowism, and now mass incarceration and police brutality? According to the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, community policing is a philosophy that promotes organizational strategies that support the systematic use of partnerships and problem-solving techniques to proactively address the immediate conditions that give rise to public safety issues such as crime, social disorder, and fear of crime. Police interventions must be implemented with strong policies and training in place, rooted in an understanding of procedural justice. Now, when we talk about procedural justice, procedurally just behavior is based on 4 central principles. 1, treating people with dignity and respect. 2, giving individuals voice during encounters, not just shut up and be quiet until I'm done, or just answer my questions. 3, being neutral and transparent in decision making. And 4, conveying trustworthy motives. Research demonstrates that these principles lead to a relationship in which the community trusts that officers are honest, unbiased, benevolent, and lawful. The community therefore feels obligated to follow the law and the dictates of legal authorities and is more willing to cooperate with and engage those authorities because it believes that it shares a common set of interests and values with the police. Indeed, without that, police interventions can easily devolve into racial profiling, excessive use of force, and other practices that disregard civil rights, causing negative reactions from people living in already challenged communities. Yet, mutual trust and cooperation, 2 key elements of community policing, are vital to protecting residents of these communities from the crime that plagues them. Community policing combines a focus on intervention and prevention through problem solving with building collaborative partnerships between law enforcement agencies and schools, social services, and other stakeholders. In this way, community policing not only improves public safety, but also enhances social connectivity and economic strength, which increases community resilience to crime. And as noted earlier, it improves job satisfaction for line officers too. Another aspect of community policing is the premise that officers enforce the law with the people, not just on the people. So community policing is not just about the relationship between individual officers and individual neighborhood residents. It is also about the relationship between law enforcement leaders and leaders of key institutions in a community, such as churches, businesses, and schools, supporting the community's own process to define prevention and reach goals. Law enforcement agencies cannot ensure the safety of communities alone, but should seek to contribute to the strengthening of neighborhood capacity to prevent and reduce crime through informal social control. More than a century of research shows that informal social control is a much more powerful mechanism for crime control and reduction than is formal punishment. And perhaps the best evidence for the preventive power of informal social control may be the millions of unguarded opportunities to commit crime that are passed up each day. Community policing cannot be a program, unit, strategy, or tactic. It must be the core principle that lies at the foundation of a police department's culture. The only way to significantly reduce fear, crime, and disorder and then sustain these gains is to leverage the greatest force multiplier, and that is the people of the community. All right? So with a couple minutes we have, or so, or less, that we have before we go to a break, I want to introduce to you Mr. Kenneth Douglas and Mr. Ben Kelso, and I want to thank you for being on What's Happening Now, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Kelso.
Good morning. Thank you for having me again. I think this is my third time here.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot more, and you too, Mr. Douglas, even though you try to get away and many times and so on. So tell me, what are your thoughts with the brief time? We'll cut in because we're going to take a break, but let's begin this conversation. What are your thoughts on the shooting that just happened, the shootings, I should say, the recent shootings that just happened this past week? And I begin with you, Mr. Douglas.
It upsets me just to see it because I lost my brother to police violence years ago. It came out that it was they pushed him. It was an accident, but it didn't come out that way when it first started. So it just brings back memories. And, I don't hate the police. We need them. And just feel, really hurt by this.
So
it brings back a lot of memories.
Yeah, so that post-traumatic stress disorder, so you kind of re-traumatize and living it over and again.
And I know they got to do their job.
Right.
But all of us are not bad, and I know all police ain't bad.
As individual police officers.
Yes.
Mr. Kelso.
These situations are replayed over and over and over again. And Mr. Douglas here was talking about post-traumatic stress and reliving these situations. And I think we all are reliving these situations, every week. And, it's sad. It's certainly troubling that we see it so much now. But I don't think that the way we're seeing it, is accurately portraying the way things really are.
Right.
I think we're seeing a snapshot of a phenomena, but we don't have the big picture.
Right. Okay, so well with that, we'll go ahead and go into our break. So we want you to stay with us. We're going to take a couple minutes break for our commercials, pay some bills, that they would say, and we'll be right back. So stay tuned to What's Happening Now.
I'm unfamiliar with that shooting. I think it was probably before my time.
Right.
But anytime law enforcement is involved in a shooting, there's got to be a bridge, a conduit of information. Sometimes I think there's a disconnect between the system, the criminal justice system in general, and communities of color.
Right.
There's a lot of things that happen and take place, but they aren't well understood. I think sometimes that people have, one vision in their minds of what the system is supposed to be like, and then there's this other version of how the system views itself.
Yeah.
And those definitions aren't always the same. All right. And as the president of the BPOA, I think my role is or our organization's role is to humanize the police, all right,
okay.
As a component of the criminal justice system, all right,
okay.
and to try to explain how the system views things. And explaining it isn't necessarily condoning injustice or mistreatment of people or
Right.
or things like that. And
Right.
sometimes that message gets
Right.
lost in the community. That when we're out and we're trying to explain how a situation is viewed, then there's backlash from the community that, oh, you support the system and you support injustice, and no, that's not it at all. But then on the other side, when you take the message back, well, this is the feedback back from the community about how they feel about a certain situation. Then you get the other side, which is, oh, you're out there, siding with the community, and you're law enforcement and so on and so forth, and that's not it at all. You're trying to just keep lines of communication open and dialogue, and because we happen to, and I say this, and I don't know how it's going to be received, but I speak the community's language.
Right.
And speaking the language means, I know how to communicate
Right.
with the community. I understand the communication. I understand
Right.
their feelings, and I understand the history. I understand going all the way back. All right. But I also now have learned this new language in this 27 years of being in law enforcement.
Right.
I understand that language and that culture and how they work as well. So, it's a win-win opportunity for the BPOA as an organization to be able to bridge that gap
Right.
between the two, because there really is a disconnect there.
Yeah. And when you say there's a disconnect, what would you say the reason for the disconnect?
Oh man,
I'm sure there's numerous, but
I mean, where do you want to start? I don't know. I mean, we could go all the way back to the establishment of policing in the United States.
Right.
We could go,
Yeah.
and I don't know how much good that would do us, but the bottom line is that I think the biggest disconnect comes in the interaction of police officers on the street with people.
Right.
I think that's where the crux of everything takes place.
Right.
It's the car stop. It's the responding to the call.
Right.
It's those sorts of things,
Right.
and understanding how to work through those situations in a manner that reflects the best interests of both entities.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Douglas, piggybacking on that and going back to when your brother Johnny Douglas was killed by police, and especially that part where you said that the officers were laughing, and there was life just lost here. What is the attitude that you see versus back then and now? Because I know, I face a lot of stuff myself dealing with the police back then, and I hear from young guys now today on the streets of what they face. But what is, from your perspective, do you see a difference in attitude? And if so, what is that difference, or is it the same?
No, it's the same. It's pretty much the same. But like I said, you got good cops and bad cops. But good cops just need to speak out more. But I heard something in Los Angeles, and they was talking about where I was saying that they could go ahead and have some kind of private line so they don't get bag flack on them from saying something about a bad cop.
Right.
Because I never want to touch a cop, but I don't want to see no good cop get hurt.
Right.
You got good ones out there.
Yeah. And and that's the thing that, if we have good cops out there, and if they're good cops, I heard somebody make an argument about this a good cop versus a good person, because how can they be good cops in a corrupt system? But if there are good cops out there, let me back up before I even talk about that. Let's look at this from the perspective of the culture within a police department. If the culture is so bad where a good cop can't speak out, there's no format, and you have to set up a system within a police department, like you would set up in a community where crime is taking place, to have somebody anonymously call in to report something.
Yes.
I think we got a big problem within the culture within that police department. Mr. Kessler, have you ever heard anything like that?
Yeah, I have, and when you start talking about the culture of police departments internally.
Yeah.
I mean, at least for the most part, American police departments are structured in a military type function, paramilitary they call it. There's a specific structure and a chain of command. Information flows from the top down, so on and so forth. It's an order-based system. It's not necessarily a system that includes the opinions or the feelings of those in the lower structure, the lower echelon of the structure, right? Now, individually, with people having individual relationships and so on and so forth, those feelings, those attitudes, they do move themselves up the chain. But at the end of the day, it's an occupation, and you have a boss, and the boss tells you what to do and how you do things. I will tell you that locally here in the San Diego Police Department, we have made some changes. We are constantly looking to revise what we do and examining ourselves. And I think that's what any law enforcement agency should do, should be constantly looking inward to see how you can improve yourselves. There is a line and a policy that allows for officers, one, if you see misconduct on the part of, or what you perceive as misconduct, that they can call in and it gets investigated. Whether or not there's supposed to be a need for that, well, I can't say, but obviously we do have one. So I can give San Diego credit for trying to be innovative, trying to adjust the system. Now, in terms of allowing good cop, bad cop, so on and so forth. I don't even know if I want to use that terminology. I'm more likely to look at, if officers perceive, misconduct or wrongdoing on behalf of another officer, then that's something that should be dealt with, at the scene through supervision, so on and so forth. And, we're working on those kind of things. We may have to change the structure, and now I'm trying to expand this out globally, that maybe the structure of law enforcement needs to be changed. Maybe we need to move away from the paramilitary structure and have a different sort of structure, because as long as you have an order-based system that denotes rank and file and leadership at the top, hands information down, and the information from the bottom doesn't necessarily go up in the same manner. As long as you have that, we may not be able to get to that place where people are free to exchange information and ideas and deal with problems as they arise. Right,
yeah. And because when you have a system, and this is one of the problems with systemic racism, structural racism, and dealing with that culture within police, whether it's paramilitary or don't snitch, they have it on the street, they get mad, police get mad at individuals that don't want to be witnesses and say things, but then within the police department they have problems with that too. And so with me,
I want to say this though. And I've been doing this for 27 years. I will tell you that no one that I know likes working with someone that they believe is a troublemaker, that causes problems, that is out there doing the wrong thing, right? No one I know likes that, right? And then there's this perception that there's, a code of silence, blue wall of silence, and there is backlash from within when conflict is created through drawing out incidents of either misconduct or poor performance on behalf of a person that's out there doing the job, right? There becomes conflict internally, snitching if you want to call it, whatever, right? But those become relationship issues within, all right? And I think the media really overplays that and over-perpetuates that and makes it seem like it's a lot bigger than what it really is.
And it's really not. And so brother,
you got it's still a problem when our videos don't count. Like if we video an accident when the police or something's going on, and when they do it, they video the body cams or it's off. Some reason the body cam's off, or it don't show the whole information, all the information. Like the guy up there who got beat by the police before the OJ thing. Rodney King. They said, look at him, he's jumping like an animal, attacking still. But what else is he supposed to do if he's getting beat down like that with a club or whatever? An animal is going to react. An animal's going to react. I'm fighting for my life now.
Right.
I'm going to have to attack back.
Right, absolutely. So let me ask you this, because when we talk about these systems and cultures, and a lot of times the narrative is white cop killing a black person. And I know, like, your brother Johnny was killed by a black police officer. And so the question I want to ask to both of you is, does it matter when we talk about doesn't matter the race of the individual when we're dealing with overrepresentation of black men being killed by police department and wanting to change that system?
What I'm looking at is, like, if I kill somebody, I'm going to jail. Why not, if the police did something and he killed someone, he's not held accountable for that? Why he's not going to jail? That's what I'm looking at. I want to know why he's not going to jail when he killed someone. Even the guy who don't have a gun, the guy who ran in the park, I don't know what state it was, got shot in the back. What is he running for? He's not coming to kill you.
That guy went to jail. That guy went to prison.
Yeah, he's going to trial right now.
Well,
yeah,
they got him.
But it's
I don't think he's been convicted yet.
That's people getting
Michael Slager was his name.
Getting
that's
tased now.
That's the fear.
And over so many times at one time, and they dying right there. It's like, come on, and then pop, pop, pop. You hearing the shots? Pop, 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 pop. He's down. Stop shooting.
Yeah. And that's and I think and you guys can give a comment on this, but I think that's the conversation that well, I shouldn't say that's a conversation that we should have. We are having that conversation, but we're having it in the wrong way, because when people look at Black Lives Matter, the first thing they say, and I hate saying this because I don't believe in black on black crime, but they say black on black crime. I like the term that we talk about early, intra-crimes, intra-related crimes, intra-related violence, where, it's between, a certain racial group. But they'll look at that and say, why don't you focus on that? Why don't you say something about that versus, crying out against, police brutality and so on. And, of course, we know that, we're crying out against that every day. We're dealing with our own kind every day when it comes to crime among ourselves and victimization among ourselves. But the term, what you just said, I think is an important key to bring out in this conversation is that when there's, quote unquote, what folks say black on black crime, we know those folks are going to get arrested, they're going to go to jail, if they get caught, eventually going to get caught. But what's happening within law enforcement and police killings is that a lot of times either these guys are not charged, and when they charge, it's hard to get a jury that will convict these guys because they believe that police officers, number one, they have to do their job. Number two, why would they lie? Why would they, harm or hurt anybody? When you're in a city like San Diego, 5-6% is only black, and 1 out of 3 of them been criminalized, you're not going to get a good jury pool of blacks on the jury. And so what you're going to end up having is a white jury, which I see all the time when I go to court for these young men. And so there's a different perspective.
That's not my
from white people and black people when it comes to that. When you talk about them being charged and arrested. What is your opinion on that, Mr. Kessel?
Well, it's certainly hard to racialize these incidents, to racialize law enforcement shootings, because they happen every day.
Right.
All right. I can tell you that, it's my opinion anyway, that officers aren't out there intentionally targeting black people to shoot them. All right. And we are seeing a phenomenon because of the video camera that disproportionately shows that, people of color are being shot, and a lot of them are unarmed. Each situation is different. Each use of force situation is different, and there's a ton of things that goes into evaluating the legality of a police use of force, and those factors change based on, the officer and the individual, and and you keep listening: height, weight, size, time of day, injury. I mean, there's just a host of factors that goes into weighing that play out when you look at the legality on the back end. Now on the street, those don't come into play, right? Unarmed versus armed. Armed with what? How are they displaying it? There's a belief out there that unarmed equates not dangerous. That's not necessarily the truth. All right. You can have a person that's armed, and they can be shot, and it may not be justified, even though they were armed with a firearm. But then you can also have a person that doesn't have a firearm, and their shooting can be justified. It really depends on the situation at the time.
Okay.
All right. And unfortunately, like I said, we're seeing a lot of these played out in the media, and we get a snapshot from a cell phone. All right. And that automatically creates this trauma that we continue to see and feel. All right. And what I it's still sad. It's still something that should be looked at. It's still something that we should always be trying to change and do something different on. But a lot of it, I think, is groupthink.
Yeah.
We kind of get on that road to Abilene, and we start. I mean, San Diego's a prime example. All right. A lot of people are seeing in social media the impact of that energy and that passion. All right, and the misjustice that people feel, the injustice they feel of their folks being shot, right? And then we start playing that out here. We're feeling that here, even though it's not happening here. It could, but it hasn't.
Right.
So why are we feeling that same level of passion, right?
But here's the thing, a couple things, because from one perspective, even when you look at of course we see more of it now because of cameras and so on, and you can actually see it and live through it. But
I get to live it.
But I think the deeper problem and issue with that is that a lot of these folks are living this every day, and black folks are living this every day when it comes to police brutality, and they know that it's real, but it's hard for them to prove it. And we can go back even to my time. I was like, I say literally kidnapped by 2 police officers. As a juvenile, I was under 18, and they took off their badges. They had me handcuffed. They told a lie, told me I had a warrant for my arrest. They didn't take me to juvenile hall. They took me to train tracks, what we call back then.
The woodshed?
Not the woodshed, because we was outside behind some trains, but they assaulted me. And
that wasn't right.
Yeah,
and I need to say that wasn't right.
I put in a complaint, nothing happened. I was also, and hey, I'm a man of truth. I'm telling you, God-given truth. I was robbed by the police. They arrested me. This time I did have a warrant. Took me, and they took my money. I had about $200, and they took my money. And I was just hoping. I saw it because I saw my money was missing. I said, "Where my money at? What money?" And then when I went after I
sound like Debo.
Juvenile. I think when I got out, I went and got my property. I said, "Money be there." It wasn't there, and I filed a complaint against it. And I've seen what happened to other folks and so on, and so I know on that end that you have some stuff going on out there that police are doing that is crooked.
Yeah.
On the other end of that spectrum, what I want to say is regard to training police officers and the training that they get now in that paramilitary type culture, and how the narrative has been framed today to look at a black man as violent and a bad dude and so on. Let me tell you, back in the 70s and coming up in the 80s, police officers were made a little bit different. I remember times when I was high on PCP, got in a fight with a police by myself in an alley. Then some of my homeboys came up. I knocked this officer on the ground and everything. He still didn't pull out his gun. And he finally subdued me, got me arrested. And then went and arrested one of my homies because he was high. And he's still by himself. I don't think that would happen today.
No.
Somebody been shot and somebody been dead, and probably been me. So what I'm saying is that officers were made a little different back then. The way they get their training and the way they perceive black people today when they have an encounter with them, and many times that encounter they end up hurt or dead. Now let me just say this, and I was sharing this with someone the other day, and then whatever opinion you want to give on this is that I know that, and And this is what a lot of times people don't see, is that police are encountering people all the time, making arrests and getting guns off people, fighting, knives and all kind of stuff, making arrests every day without pulling out the gun or shooting somebody. I met an officer the other day, said he's retired, never put his gun out. So I know these things are still happening. We just don't see them. We see the worst end of it.
Yeah.
But
that's the social media effect right there. You're only seeing the one that is the big deal event. You're only seeing that, right? I mean, and when you really look at it, and I use San Diego as an example. At any point in time, there could be 100 officers out working in San Diego. All right, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Depends on the hour of the day, right? And of those hundreds that are 100 that are working, let's say 90% of their time is responding to a call for service that doesn't involve an arrest, all right? So of those, let's say maybe 10%, and I don't have the exact numbers, right, throughout any given shift, will make an arrest. And of that, maybe only one or two will use force. We'll even find it necessary, if that, right? So when you really look at it, the shooting aspect, the use of deadly force aspect, is a minute, right? I mean, it is the lowest of the lowest of the lowest incident that takes place out there. But because we get to see it played out so much, we have this projection that it's larger than life. It's happening all the time.
Right.
And even one is bad.
Right.
And in saying that, I'm not condoning that use of force against anybody. Deadly force is a good thing. It's not.
Right.
It's always a bad thing. And when it's excessive, it's a bad thing.
Right.
I'm only saying that most of the officers overwhelmingly are out there doing the job every day and not hurting people and not getting hurt.
Right. And my thing is that when you want to build a positive image of the police department, and especially in San Diego, at least from what I've experienced, and I've had issues with this, and I've called some things out on this, is that when the police and law enforcement, from captains on up, when they do positive images of things they're doing in the community, they sit on the news and the media with white folks. But all the positive things that black people are doing and brown people are doing in the community with the police, they never publicize that. It's almost like they're afraid to be seen with us on the news or whatever, or the media. Maybe it's just some kind of implicit bias, as we would say, when the police community, maybe they're using the same type of attitude when it comes to publicity and promoting the police department from a positive perspective, because there's a lot of positive things that goes on in the black community and brown community that black folks are doing with law enforcement and partnering up and teaming up and things like that, but they never think about to bring that in the forefront to the city at large. But when something negative happens, or we say in the media, we'll be called on that. So we got to balance it out on both ends of that perspective when it comes at, if they want to build a good image,
right,
and in the light of the community and so on. But we have a few more minutes left. I did have a couple of questions that I did want to ask though. So in the last few months, the amount of police brutality incidents against African American Latinos have seemed to be on the rise. Why would we say that? Is it because of social media, or is there something else going on, Brother Kenny Douglas? And you can go first on this.
I don't see. Fox News. It portrays us very bad.
Yes, they do. I don't even watch it.
Yes.
At least the cable one.
Oh man, Fox is just killing us. So it's make us seem like a bunch of animals. They call us animals. You got some nerve to call us animals. Anytime a black person would do good back in your history, look at what was that? Oklahoma. They did good. They, what they would call, they had to borrow money from the bank, so you was the uppity niggas. You the ones, the people they hung, and they want to talk about blacks always struggling. When you did better than them, they want to burn your businesses down. They want to destroy you. They want to hang you. People want to come out here and now we get killed in jails. Come on, man. This got to stop. So we got to get out and vote. Get out and vote.
That's right. That's right.
Make a change.
That's right. What about you, Mr. Kelso? When we look at the rise, I know you touched on the social media a little bit. Do you think that's it, or is it actually a...
Well, You know,
rise that's happening here.
I certainly understand that we have a branding issue in communities of color. We always have been. You know, I do feel that throughout our history, it has been intentional to portray communities of color in that manner. Social media weighs in, all right?
For sure.
But on the other side, I think we need to do a better job of taking control of our own branding, our own image. You know,
right.
You're doing it with your radio show, and even though I said quit tagging me like 10 times in your poster, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're putting out your own brand, your own image. We're trying. Social media does allow us to take control of some of that back.
Right.
All right. And maybe to rewrite the narrative, reframe the narrative, and don't let Fox News frame the narrative of what community of color, is like. I certainly think that we need to also do more as a community to get out and celebrate our successes when officers are out doing good things in the community, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we don't do as good a job of that as we could.
Right.
We really do need to do more. If you look historically. Some of the things that have created breakdowns in our communities, I would look back to the success of the civil rights movement, all right? But the success of the civil rights movement came at a cost, and what it came at a cost of is of the degradation of the black community, because suddenly now integration, right, eliminated the need for a black community. Before, when we were segregated, and I'm not advocating for us to be segregated, I'm only speaking on a historical perspective, that civil rights and inclusion came at a cost, and that cost was the breakdown. Now, suddenly we can go spend our money in other communities, and we can go live other places, and we can go, so that suddenly, dissolved our resources being pooled all together as one, and that weighs in on historically anyway.
Yeah, my boy, and I call him my boy. I didn't even know him, but Malcolm X. That's one of the things that he said. He said that we black folks are taking their money and going and spending it in other places in the white community and so on, while they let their own community die out, not even reinvesting and putting the money into their own community and so on, but taking it somewhere else.
That's the subject of a radio show itself.
Exactly. They complain about how run down the community is, but he said you run it down yourself when you take your money other places and don't spend it in your own community. And and that's one of the things, even with this radio show here, getting black folks to support it, and get behind it. And so we need that support, to build it up and so on. So with the few minutes that we have left, I did want to get into at least one more question that we can deal with. Now, Mr. W, concerning race relations, what can law enforcement do in the community to build healthy and good relationships in the community?
They say word is that you're from the community, you get better, policing. You get to know each other. So you get to mend, once you get to knowing each other by being there and patrolling that community, but get to knowing your neighbors, people you work around.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because one of the thoughts that I had about Keith is Keith Scott, that got killed in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, is that you heard what his wife said. He has TBI, he just took his medication, and so on. I really believe that if there's real community policing there, and if these officers really knew that community that they were coming into, and knew people like Keith, they would have dealt with him in a different way. They would have knew he had brain injury. They would have knew, that he takes a medication, he's off sometime, and things like that, and dealt with it in a different kind of way. You can't just rush in and shoot and kill somebody that you know and that you have a relationship with and in that community. And so there has to be that, and I agree, there has to be some kind of concern and care there. Mr. Kelso, what do you think?
I do agree that we want to try to recruit from within our communities people that have an inert knowledge of what happens in that community every day. But it's not so easy. In fact, it's incredibly difficult. One, to find people of color that just because of how we've been cultured, even myself as a child coming up, we've been cultured to not seek out law enforcement as a career choice, right? So that's a hurdle that we have to overcome internally. I would suggest people listening to this show, send us your sons, your daughters, your grandsons, your granddaughters. Hey, come to the table by having someone from that community get in the law enforcement field. All right, that now brings that community's influence to the table. That's how we try to make this better. Right. So that you find people from within that can go out and now be law enforcement leaders within the community.
Right, absolutely, and you'll be more sympathetic and understanding in a community that where you're serving, and you're connected, and you feel a more of a personal responsibility to ensure public safety and public health, and to serve that community and build a relationship around that, and so on. So we have a few minutes left, and I just want to ask each of you, if you can, like in 20 seconds, tell me what is your opinion of Black Lives Matter.
I love it. I love it because it's not just that nobody else. It's only black people's lives matter. It's that we're the ones who getting shot, and we know if we get caught, like I said, if I kill somebody, did something wrong, I'm going to jail if I get caught for it. Show us a little respect. Don't just think everybody's. Well, we got to respect ourselves too at the same time.
Okay.
So,
Mr. Kessel.
Black Lives Matter is a really misunderstood movement.
Yes.
The people have a right to expect that their criminal justice system, and particularly their law enforcement, are going to treat them justly and fairly and not hurt them. All right. And that's really what Black Lives Matter is about. But the message has gotten swayed into all kinds of other things, right? And then we start diluting it, talking about other stuff, black on black crime, this and that or whatever. But really what it's about is about criminal justice reform. And within the criminal justice system, we should listen to that, but we don't.
Right, absolutely, and dealing with police brutality and bringing those who kill folks unlawfully to justice. All right, we thank you for tuning in to What's Happening Now. Great show today, and want you to tune back in next Sunday at 10 o'clock a.m. So on KBLKradio.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back here at the same time and the same station next week. God bless.
KBLKradio.com is made possible